morning. Good Monday morning. I don't know if anyone's there yet. If you are, let me know how the music sounds, if the music sounds alright, if you can hear my voice over the music, if I need any adjustments, let me know. We're going to continue on with building Twitter. So obviously here is what actual Twitter looks like. And then this was our first kind of pass just in the HTML CSS. And we had these hovers going, and we even made it so that you could follow and unfollow. And then now we've started to refactor into using classless CSS approach. So we're taking this exact same thing here and then turning it into a classless CSS approach. And so the difference in there, if we look at pre-refactoring, this is the code. So pretty bulky, lots of classes in there. It's just really long code, and it's 363 lines. And then we refactored the HTML and got rid of as many of the classes as we could. There's still some things that require classes, but the idea isn't to get rid of all classes, it's just to be extremely intentional with which classes we use. And then, as you can see, the code just looks quite a bit cleaner, in my opinion. And we're down to 290 lines instead of 363, so that's a pretty good improvement. And it just looks a lot cleaner. If you can just see the preview in here, just how bloated this code looks compared to this. Much nicer to look at. And then we also started using Sass instead of style.css. So style or CSS and Sass instead of CSS. So CSS here, this was our pre-refactoring. This was our original CSS code. Lots of classes, lots of different things. And then now we're just moving this over into Sass. And so we're starting with our variables. And the nice thing with that is that then we actually get theming right out of the gate. So if we want to create a dark theme for this, we can just change these colors, change some of these variables, and then we'll have a dark theme. So that'll be something we'll do sort of at the end. Last week we rebuilt this part here. There's a few things, these hovers go all the way across. I'm not really going to play around with that too much today, but we do need to fix some of the spacing. These are a little bit taller. Yeah, just the icons are a little bit small. Oh no, these ones are a little bit big, that's the problem. This one should be bigger, these ones should be smaller. A little bit more space, and then we got to finish styling this here. So that's where we are at. The first thing I'm going to do is just fix these little these icons here. So in our Sass, we do need to watch the Sass so that it compiles as we edit. And then that just basically outputs the file into this distribution folder, CSS, and then the minified Sass. So then it's also compressed in that way too. It's minified so that it's a smaller version of the file. So we have our aside with the name left sidebar. And the nice thing with using the names, well, actually we could do this with classy as well, but with using the names is that it's a little bit more descriptive. This is the name of this section, this aside. And we could, because we're using a grid now, we could move these around just by giving these grid names, grid area names, which is kind of a cool option. So we got our font size as 2.6. What are we looking at here? These icons. So I think the icon actually should be the same. I think that's, oops. let's just make this 1.8, and then we don't need to that looks better, other than our first one there. So how do we find that in our markup? Let's move that over there. The Twitter is the first one in the nav, so we can reference that by saying a colon first child. And in this particular one, we want to set the font size to 2.6. And we'll go rems. Maybe even bigger. We will go to 3.2. And we have got these anchors as display flex. What happens if we do inline flex? Is that going to make them... It's annoying me to have these expand all the way across there, but I haven't quite figured out the best way to fix that yet. What's going on there? Let's... Yeah, size-wise that looks good, but we do need a bit more spacing. So let's try this. And is that... Yeah, that looks better. Still want a little bit of margin on the top. So margin top 1 rem, just to bump that down a tiny bit. That's better, because that's kind of, yeah. Could even just go 0.5. And actually, I think I'm just gonna put that onto here. But I think size-wise, that looks good. I'm gonna spend like 3 or 4 minutes trying to figure out getting these to just expand to the width of this, and if I can't do it, I'm gonna move on and not worry about it. These are the types of problems that, like, it's if the design says you have to have it so that it expands to there, which is kind of like what we're doing because we're trying to recreate it. I actually kind of like it expanding in this way. It doesn't really bother me. So if I was doing this for myself, I might actually leave it there. But if I was doing this for a client and they wanted that in there, this is the type of annoying problem that can end up taking an hour to try and figure out. And then it's really hard to explain to a client why it took you an hour to make this end at the end of these things. So the easiest way that I find to do this would be to just play with it in the browser right here, because then we can make some changes to it without having to recompile everything. But that inline flex doesn't seem to do anything. So let's try flex shrink. I don't know if it's supposed to be numbers or... is what do we got? We have our SVG, and then in this it's got nothing. So we're basically just saying it's flex, and the reason we want it flex is so that we can make these things go side by side. Let's try something like flex 0. I shrink flex 1, I shrink flex 2. Shrink property specified as a single number. Negative values are invalid, defaults to 1. So 1's going to be sets flex shrink factor of a flex item. If the size of all flex items is larger than the container, items shrink to fit according. Okay, so that's not really what we're wanting to do. Make flex container not full width. Content none, here we go. Use display inline flex, that's what we tried. Container from block level, which takes the full width of its parents, to inline level, which takes the full width of its content. That's what I thought. Center justified content. Center answer that inline flex on the parent is the correct property for the use case. It's not ideal, but if you wrap the button in a container that is inline block, the button will scale naturally. Well, I don't really want to. Oh, because nav is also flex because we're going top to bottom. What happens if we just make this not a flex container? Okay, so it doesn't need to be a flex container because it's already going to be doing that. Now let's try there we go. But the problem is that now we do need them to appear on one line. So inline flex direction column. Let's try inline flex on there and see what happens. Sit still. Well, for now we know that goes like that. For now we'll just leave it because it's not really worth spending more time on. There is a way to solve that problem. We're just probably not going to solve it right now. I don't want to take up more time on that. Let's style this guy here. This is real Twitter. This is our first version. So yeah, let's style this guy here. We have the image with the hover. That's the same. We need to make the text. So is this our footer? Yeah, this is our footer within the aside. So we need to make the color inherit. And I'm just gonna scale. Let's shrink this over to here so we can see it happen. And we want the font size to be 1.6 maybe. Yeah, we've already got our mobile stylings on this one. Yeah, 1.6 looks good. And we want text decoration, none. And how do we have the markup? We have our strong and then we have a span. So the span we'll make it a tiny bit smaller and we'll make it our gray 3. Gray 2? No, must be gray 3. Is there a gray 4? No, just gray, whoops, gray 3. Yeah, that'll work for now. And that looks good. That image looks wonky. Why does that image look wonky? That's interesting. Why is... Oh, I think... because it must take the margin into... How can the height and width be different? Let's go 5 rem, and then we won't put our margin on here. Let's see how that looks. So that's interesting. This one we want a margin left of 1 rem. I should bump that over. No? Okay. Does this have like a maximum height on it or something? Does Doesn't look like it. Does this have a maximum height? Font size, padding, our border radius. Does our footer have a maximum height? No. So I'm not really sure why. This is being wonky. If we make our width bigger and our height smaller, then it looks correct. That's so strange. So strange to me. Okay. Well, let's do it strange then. And then a margin right of 1 rem. I don't know why that's working, but for some reason it's working. And do we want it a little bit? It's got about 1. Yeah, let's give it a bit of more space underneath. The entire footer, we have margin bottom 2 rem already. So why is that? Oh, because we're not all the way down. Yeah, so there's plenty of room there. We actually probably only want 1 rem there. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. Left column is kind of complete. Let's go on to the center. So we've got our header here, and it's got this little icon in there, so let's get that started first. What is our markup on it? So we have our main and we have our header, so let's do that. So now we are styling our main and a header within there. And so we're able to do the nested classes only because we're doing SAS, not CSS. So this is going to be a display flex. It's going to be align items center and justify content space between. Now this is a pretty common setup, so this might be something that I would want to maybe create a mixin for, so that so that we don't have to type it out as many times. It could be a way to save space. Although technically in the end it does output the same anyway. It's kind of those balancing acts, like sometimes you can refactor wave so far in that it doesn't even, it's not even worth it. It's like normalizing a database to the point where it's useless. But so we've got a little bit bigger font and some padding around there. So let's just say our font size is going to be our 1.8 rem. And I think I'm going to just on my body give a font size of 1.8 rem as a kind of a base font size. Maybe 1.6. So that's pretty standard. We'll make it 16 pixels. Does that look? Is this zoomed or something? No, it just seemed a little bit bigger than this. Maybe not. It's because we're using M's now as well, so, and I haven't reset the same way that I did with these ones here. I think, are we using a normalize in here as well? I'm not. I'm using my own standard resets. So we could throw a normalize on here, which would possibly make it a little bit cleaner, but let's leave it on our own right now and not use a normalize. So yeah, these look a little bit better now. So same thing, we want our header, the anchor tags to be color inherit, and text decoration none. And we're going to give this a padding of 1.15 rem and 1.5 rem maybe. And then whatever we do, it's kind of the same over here. So if this, then that does look like about, looks like that actually could be 2 pixels, or 20 pixels, 2 rem. And we do have this border, so let's put that in there so we can see what we're doing. There, I'm going to do a left and right border on the main itself. So border left 1 pixel solid, and we'll do our gray 3, I think. And then we need to do the same on the right. And then the header is going to be border bottom. The same. Let's see how that looks. And it definitely looks a little bit too dark, so let's try with our gray 2. This is gray 3. Let's do this 2. And so that looks a bit too light, so I think that's where we need to start making a little bit of adjustments here. This one's even lighter than that, and that's the next one. So we've got our, this will be our 1, our 2, and our 3. And then there's a 4, which is even darker. So let's make some adjustments there. So I do want a gray 4, which is this pretty dark one. Let's just go into Real Twitter and see if we can grab some colors. I use this page color picker. It works pretty good. Sometimes it works better than others. So this is going to be our, this one's actually lighter. That one's lighter. This one here is the same color as the border. So that's going to be our, this is our 1, this is our 2, this is our 3, and then, oh, maybe not. I think I've created 3. Maybe we do only need 3. So this border is our 2, because 1 is this one. That's the light color, yeah. So this is our 2. And then our 1 is this. And I think maybe we did already do this. Okay. So that's our 2, and then our 3. Let's just double check our 3, which is this color. Hello there, Terang369. I'm having a great Monday. How about you? Sometimes it's hard to get these close-up ones, so sometimes it's easier, rather than just doing the color picker, we can select the element itself. I think I'm going to need to go down here. Did you have a good weekend, Terang? Let's see. We've got this. Does it have a color on there? Fill color? Current color. It's not telling me what that color is. So if I can grab this, computed. What is our color? This is our color, but I want the hex. But let's see if we can. Whoops, I just opened Firefox. That's not what I wanted to do. This is our gray 3, I believe. 84939F. 84939F. Okay, so we did already get that, so that's good. So this is our gray 3, which we chose, and then our gray 2 will be the border. Gray 2, gray 2, gray 2. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, that looks good. And we'll make this spacing inside of each one, but we need this header, and then that'll be the color. How did we do? Yeah, that's the thing. So let's take a look at how we marked this up. So we just have our header, our first, and our second. So if we're doing this with the classless approach, we do have this hover link class. Have I already created that? No. So I think what the intention was is this was one of the cases where we would actually create a class. So we've got this rounded image because that's one that's used quite often, and then we're going to need this hover link because it's pretty common to have those hover links in there. And what this hover link does is the color is going to be inherit. The background color is going to be our blue one. No, this is just on hover. So, and hover, we will do this. Okay, and we want to have a padding of, let's just say 1 rem, and a border radius of 50%. Let's do 0.75 rem. See how that looks. That looks good. And how have we done it? So they've got a blue one, so the color is blue. That's going to be unique because not all of them are blue with this hover link. So let's make that specific to this. Our color is going to be inherit, no text decoration, but we do want our last child. So the last one in here, we're going to make it the color of blue 2. This is our better one. There we go. Perfect. And then our first one, first child, we'll make this bolder. That looks good. It could be even a bit bolder. Let's go with 900 and see how that looks. Good. So this was for anybody who's new that's watching, we built this. This is obviously original Twitter, then this was our rebuild of it, and then now we're rebuilding it, refactoring it by getting rid of the classes. And so what that looks like is we have our index.html, our original one that we wrote, and this was kind of just a complete clone of Twitter. And you can see there's lots of classes in there, 363 lines of code. And this is our original styles for that. So those two pages create this here. It gives us all of this. Basically looks just like Twitter. But lots and lots of CSS and lots of classes. And then now we're basically refactoring, and we've taken the HTML and just cleaned it up, so there's minimal classes, just classes where they're most appropriate. As you can see, it just even looking on the side here, it looks a lot cleaner. And we're down to 290 lines of HTML. And then our Sass, we've just started rebuilding last week, so we've only gotten the first part of it done, but it's already cleaner. With Sass 2, we can do these nested things, so now we're kind of grouping things. These are all the things that are related to the main center section versus in our style CSS where we kind of just go on and on and on forever. And that's kind of where we're at with that. So next we have the form, which is this part here. We got these little buttons and this tweet button. So now we're going to style the form because this top part looks pretty good. I'm kind of thinking, oh, it's because we have this. What is this? Yeah, there's some minor adjustments there, but I think we're pretty good. Let's style the form. It should look like this. So we've got our image. This is like a 2-column container, because this, where does this go to? So that's actually probably something that you could look at. What does Twitter do for this? Oops. What does Twitter do when you get to the end? Okay, so those are actually below it, so that's something to keep in mind. We've got this column and then we've got this column, and then these are separated below that. So this, in theory, should just expand when we get to the end. So it must be a text area instead of a text box. So let's do that. And the auto expanding is not something that really is super easy. It seems like something that should be kind of built in, but I haven't worked with it for a while, but I do remember that it was something that required some finessing on the back end. So let's make this a text area instead. And let's take a look at what we've got. So we've got our form, and we can make that display flex, and we've got this image, and then we've got our div, which is the container. In there we've got our text area, which could be the top piece, and then this bottom area. And then there we've got this piece here and this piece here. So I think that works structurally. So we can start laying that out. But our text area, instead of being like this, we did have it as an input box instead. Now we're going to use it as a text area. So let's see what that does that's different. Not a whole lot. Okay, so then in our styles here, we've done the header. Now we're going to get into our form. And so we can just call it form. We don't have to give it a class or do anything like that, because we know that this is the form that's within main. Now, if the page was more complex, this is like assuming that we already know this layout, so it does work, this classless approach, for something that's kind of a known layout. It could be a bit trickier if you're building something that's really complex, because you may have two mains, or you may have, so it really requires you to find your selectors and be very specific about what things you're targeting. So our form, we want it to be display flex, and this will put our image beside everything else. And so it's interesting that this strange thing is happening with these images. I think that's because they're not inside of a container. So I think I'm just going to put this into a container. I kind of wanted to just do it without the containers, but I think this is the better way to do it. Is at least then. And same with this one here. I might go back and do that, fix that one there. So now we've got this in here, and then in here we've got this big border bottom. So let's just put that in there so we know where our container is. So we have a border bottom of, say, 6 pixels solid, and it is that our gray 2. And then in here we do have about, it's that same spacing as up above, which I think it may actually be a little bit less. And our rounded images should always have that hover on them, I think. So we can do that. Let's just say and hover, filter, saturate 0.8. Let's see what that looks like. Does that actually give us the effect we're looking for? Does not seem so. Transition. Is that actually working? But it's not doing that. So what did we do on these? Because those are working. Let's just take a look at what we did. Image, profile image, hover, transition filter. So it does have a filter, but what filter are we using? How do I? Brightness. Okay, cool. So let's just do that same thing. Our brightness. Whoops. That's better. Okay. And so we obviously need that border bottom to be more. So I'm going to make that 1.5 rem. And I think our padding left will be 1.5 rem, or we'll just do padding. What is that? Let's just do 1.5 rem padding all the way around and see what that looks like. Okay, so that's too thick, but the rest I think looks pretty good. So this should just be 1 rem, 10 pixels. That looks good. And our image is there, that looks good. So then we need some space. So then in our form we have our forms display flex, and then we've got these 2 items. So our second div in here, we need to display flex, and its flex direction will be column. So let's go with last child, display flex. Yeah, so I don't want all the divs that are last childs to be that, so I think I just need to do this, and that way it's just the descendant div, or the first div. And we can check that out by just giving a background color of red. And so let's get rid of this first and see what this does. So you'll see, I guess well, maybe not actually, because we may, let's give a border 1 pixel solid red, so we can see if there's more than one that has this. So in this particular case, I think we would be okay, but if we had another div inside of here, so if for some reason we wanted, so in this case we're okay, but if for some reason we needed another div in here, then now that's also going to be affected by this selector. Whereas if I go into here and I say just the first div, that should get rid of that. Yeah, so now it's just the first div that's being affected, and that's what we want. So that's something important to remember. We want to display flex, and we want the flex direction to be column. And in here, let's just say our text area, text area width will be 100%, height will be 3em, say, border none. Okay, so the width 100% isn't working, but that's okay. I need to make this have a margin left of 1 rem, just to give it some space. Is that going to be enough? Yeah, I think so. No, let's go with 1.5 rem, which is the same as the outer spacing, so that should give a bit better there. Our font size on the text area, we want that to be a bit bigger, say 1.8 rem. We had it quite a bit bigger. Let's just bump it up to say 2.2 rem. It could even go bigger than that. Let's go 2.4. And it's got the good coloring. The font is off though, so I'm not really sure. What did we do originally for fonts? So we gave it this font as our main one. What have we done on the current one? It's the same. So let's family. Let's see, did we change the family? No, we didn't. Okay. So it's kind of strange that one is a different font. But that could be because we're a text area now. What is the font family of this? Let's take a look. Font family, monospace. And on here, our font family is Arial, neither of which is one that we've selected. So there's an example of how the browsers can do different things. This is not even browsers, this is just, well, text area and input. That's one different. Let's set everything to this and see what happens. That looks much better. Now I need to adjust the sizes. So I don't know if I want to explicitly say everything is. I think I will for now. Let's go back to our form. Now our font size can be like 2 instead. I think that'll be all right. Yeah, that looks better. So we do need to make this width of 100%, which is not working. Form and our div and then our second div. So what's happening here? Display flex, and what we want, flex grow 1? No. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Main form text area. No. So I thought I did put that style in there with 100%. Yeah. Did it not just pick? Okay. Now it's working. All right. What do they do for outline? They do no outline. Text area. Outline none, and I may put an outline on it when we kind of do our own styling on it, because then it'll make it more accessible, but for now we'll leave it at that. And so this, let's see, so yeah, when we expand, it's actually not, this is the part that I was saying, that Twitter must have done something specific to make it so that when you get to here, it actually, oh, this is ours. This is real Twitter, that it expands, because that is not default functionality. And it's actually fairly complex. I've definitely done an auto-expanding one, and it's not easy. So we have our tweet button, and it'll be disabled by default. So let's go button disable. No. So we do have our flux direction or column, and then in here we have our div last child. So this is an interesting experiment. So I'm playing around with this idea of styleless or classless CSS, but there is some challenges. This is like when you get into here, now we're doing these last childs, which is okay, but if you move anything around in the DOM, then that's going to break all of this. So I'm not really sure what the best approach is for these types of things. If anybody else has worked with classless CSS, and especially on these like nested levels here, I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts on how to best handle this. This we want to display flex, align items, center, and justify content space between. just see how this, there, so that's got that. Yeah, I need to take a little break, but I will be right back. I'm back. Okay, back. So we're learning the CSS classless approach, and this is one thing so I've built a couple of them, frameworks, and they work great for standard blog systems. This is the first time I've implemented on like a more complex system. And one of the first things that I've come across now is just when you start to get into these nested last child things here, it gets a little muddy. So I'm not really sure what the best approach is in this particular case. We could play with the markup to maybe make it a little bit more clear. I'm not sure. It depends on how kind of granular you want to get in your selectors. But this does, one of the problems that I see in this is just making it so that if I was to move stuff around, it would break the CSS. So that's definitely one challenge that I have seen, that I'm curious to know if anybody's thoughts or suggestions or experiences with working with this. But let's continue. So this is original Twitter, this is what we got to with just standard HTML and CSS, and then now we're taking it into the classless approach. So this is where we're at, kind of in the center here. We got to style these buttons, or these anchors. So in here we have our anchor tags, and the color on them is going to be our blue 2. And they got a bit more space in them. And do they have the hover? Yeah, so we do have, this is one case where we have been using some classes. It's not no class, it's minimal class. So I will put this hover link on here because this is a specific style for a link that we want to be able to provide. So I would say in this case, this is a good use of a class. And that automatically, so there's a little bit of wonkiness in the size of it. So I do want to maybe give them a width of 3 M, something like that. Let's do it in here and see. Here's our anchor. Let's hover that. So obviously that's not affecting it here. Padding 1.5 rem, 1 rem. What if I do like 0.75 rem? That gives us the round. Is that round? I think that's round. Let's do it with that. Padding 0.75 rem. And in this current setup, 1 rem is equal to 10 pixels. It's a little wonky. Maybe we will need to go with 1 rem. Let's do 0.75 rem and 1 rem. So I think that they're... Yeah, that looks better. That looks more round. Okay. And then our tweak button by default should actually be disabled. It is, okay. So we know that that is a button. We don't have it disabled. So disabled is going to be cursor not allowed and opacity 0.7. How does this work? And yeah, we need the end. There we go. Okay, so and our font size on it. Yeah, we do have to, that's one thing, our scrolls are have scrolls on here. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fine. I think that's fine for now. We may want to tweak that a little bit afterwards, but let's leave that at that. Next, we have our actual tweets. And so here's where we can use the section and articles. So this section's name is tweets. So this part is where I see like the CSS that could work really well. So inside of our main, we have a section that has a name of tweets. And let's just make sure we are referencing that correctly. We'll just give it a background color of red, and we'll see, boom, okay. And then inside of there, there's articles. And each article represents a tweet, so that's how we get away with not having to actually put classes on here. And so here's maybe the approach is that we could do that this is the article, but then within here we may need to do classes to reference these specific things. And that might be a better approach than just getting rid of classes altogether. So section name is tweets, and then we've got an article in there, and in here we've got this image. And I think this is another thing too that I'm going to do is put this image inside of a container, because I think having them inside of containers is actually helpful. Well, let's see. Let's first try it without having a container and see what we can do. So our article needs to be display flex because it is the same thing. It's got this image on the side and then it's got this other spot over here. So the same thing. So our article will be display flex. It's also going to have a padding of 1.5 rem. What is going on here? Why is this image like this? Let's take a look. Image, rounded image. We've got our div with a header, a div, and a footer. And so this is where I would probably use a main into here. Then you have to be really careful in your selectors. Yeah, it really makes you have to think about where you put things. So if I instead put this into a container, what does that do? Yeah, that's better. What is this? This is our header. Oh, so there's where, yeah, so our header here is now, this is where we want just the first level header. There. Our article, we want our div first child to have, or I'm going to do last child, so it keeps it the same as what we were doing before. Our last child will have a padding or a margin left of 1.5 rem. That should give us our space. And what have we got inside of here? So we have a header, and then it's got an H2. And that's why it's so huge. We don't want it to be big text like that. We want everything basically to start at the standard font size. So what we can do is within our article, our H2 font size is 1.6. And we actually want to be up one above the other. And then we've got that icons. How is that structured? Our header, we've got our span, we've got our anchor, which is in our H2, and then we've got our hover link, which goes to the other side. So our header will actually be display flex. Inside the article, our header, and I'll take this H2 and move it up here. We want this to be display flex. And it's not really a line items center, it's actually baseline in this particular case. How does Twitter have it? Twitter's got it up at the top, so I'm going to actually do it that way instead. Display flex, align items, flex start, justify content space between. And then our H2 is actually also going to be display flex, flex direction, column. And then we've got that. And then we're going to have a bit of space, and I think I'll put that on the div instead. So our header, no, maybe I'll do it the other way. I'm going to put a margin bottom. We'll keep that same consistency. And then our anchor tags. So the span, this is actually inside the H2. So our span, and actually all anchors, color, inherit, text decoration, none. Our span is going to be is it supposed to look like? It's the gray 2. Gray 3. Okay. Our font weight will be 400. Except for okay. So the H2 will be, except for our spans, will be 500, and then this will be 700. Our spans are going to be 400, and this will be 600. Oh, that's why, for font weight. Yeah, and our spans, I'm gonna make the 0.9m. Just make it a little bit more, and then we need to get our first span H2, and it is a first child inside of there, so font size 0.75m, and we'll do a transform translate x minus 1 rem. We'll see how that looks. So that looks good. The image though actually goes down, so I think inside of our first child we'll give a margin top of 1.5 rem. We'll just bump that image down a bit. That's pretty good. So each of the articles does have a border bottom, and on hover we go to that color grade 1 or whatever. So we can do that. Actually, let's put that at the bottom of the article. Background color is gray 1. Good, and then we need in the article we do a border bottom 1 pixel solid, and our gray 2 I think is our border color. Good. Obviously the show this thread needs to be fixed, and then these icons all need to be fixed, and that's our footer. How did I structure the show this thread? Is it in the footer? It's below the footer. Okay. How is that going to work in the flow? Because I think, yeah, it needs to be across the whole thing. So that's actually not going to work for having it in here. This actually needs to go in here, but that won't work either, because that's going to make it go over here. That's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. should show up below there, because ideally with the threads it has like a, I don't even see any in here. Yeah, show this thread. It's got this line between them that we need to create. Oh, but it's a completely different, no, it's part of the same, but then it's also got its own anchor. So what that looks like is we've got our top piece and then a bottom piece, and our top piece is split into these two. Okay, that is tricky. These are the problems that we need to solve. So, in light of this new information around these kind of first classes and first childs and things, I'm wondering if it makes sense for me to add some classes and do this a little bit different. It's almost like there's two. I want it to be universal so that if there is a thread, it just shows up. If not, then it doesn't. So I don't really want to necessarily the only way that I can think to do it would be to do something like this. Is put this around here. Same thing, we put this around here, and then I can take this and move it out here. And then what we need to do is, instead of the article itself, we need the first div. Let's do this. That might work. What's happened there? Did I move this? Oh, because it's the article that needs. So what we can do is do this. I don't know if I broke that. Let's go back to here. So we need to also have the article. So this becomes that, this becomes this, and then we can select everything down to our yellow. Move that over, including that. Then this goes here, and then our hover actually goes here. And is there a line between it? There's not a line on the top. There should be a line just on the bottom. So the line just goes on the article. So that's here. Yes, this is a case where I think we have to put a class equals thread. We need to have a class in this particular case because we can't do last child because it's not always going to be the last child. So what we can do in here is show thread, and it is going to gray 3, and that way it's got its own not gray 2, yeah, there we go. It's going to have a cursor of pointer. It's going to be display flex, and we can do the same thing where we put that into a there, and then we can say first child, we want a margin right of 1.5 rem, and the image inside of there we want a width of 80% and a height of 80%. Let's see if it just makes that a bit smaller. So we need to figure out where that extra padding and stuff is coming from. Yeah, so here's our interesting, where we start to get into these divs first child and things like that, because now this is actually saying I need a margin top because it is the first child of a div inside of an article. So there's, because I did that on these top ones here. So there's the pitfalls. That is the pitfalls of the CSS classless approach. It works good for basic blog type setups, but when you start to get into these complex layouts, it's not quite as effective. I do really like the approach, so I still want to do that. I think for the main sections of things, it totally makes sense. Let's get rid of the classes on those, but it definitely requires a lot more thinking. Let's go into here. What is going on with the because now all divs inside of the articles have, the first divs inside of the articles all have this padding, which isn't what we want. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Padding 0. Okay, so I think I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I like this approach. I think we need to do a combination approach. So I don't think that this first child approach is going to be the answer. First child, last child. I think we need to get rid of those first child, last child things. Even some of the body, the first div inside the body, that I think is okay. But I think I'd rather do dot wrapper, and in this case I am going to give it a class of wrapper. body div class equals wrapper. No, let's stick with it. Let's stick with it. I think I'm giving up too easily. Let's solve the problem and then go back and refactor. That's what this is all about, is just refactoring. Refactor. To learn, not to accomplish. Yeah. So our footer inside of our article let's do our footer display flex items space between justify content space between. This is align item center. Max width 90%. Color inherit. Text decoration none. And are they inherit or are they gray? No, they're gray. So our color is actually going to be, actually no, we'll put the color here. The color is going to be gray 3. So there's where the inherit works, because I do want the numbers to be the gray and the link to be the gray. And then we want a bit of padding. So our padding is going to be 1.5 rem and 0 on the left and right. That looks good. And it looks good on this one here, but it doesn't look good on this one here. Although that's kind of the same. How does it look on real Twitter? Yeah, they shrink it down quite a bit. So actually, no, they just don't have a whole lot of padding on the bottom. Let's just shrink that down. Padding on the top and bottom is pretty light. So in the article, padding top and bottom will go 1 rem and then 1.5 on the left and right. And same on our footer here, we want 1 and 0. That's interesting. Why did that not get smaller? Oh. There we go, that's... Yeah, so there is more on the... Let's just go 1 0 0 0. So it's just padding on the top. That's top 1 rem. And there, we'll leave the bottom. Perfect. Now padding 0. Let's see what that does. Yeah, so our padding's going to be 1.5 rem, or no, it's 1 rem, 1.5 rem, 0, and 1.5 rem. Nothing on the bottom. Align item center. That looks better, yeah. And so we actually don't need any on the top. 0. There's this margin. Margin 0, 1.5, 0, and 0. Fooled by my own demise. Okay. Now, what can I do here? If I go padding rem 0, does that... Yeah. But then we need to make the image height 3 rem, width 3 rem. .5 rem. Yeah, okay, so we do image height 3.5 rem, but that means we actually have to do more padding on the left and right to make it centered. Not that much. 2. .5, and then our margin is actually going to be 2. That looks better. We do need a little bit of 0.5, 2 rem, 0.5 rem. It's a little wonky. It's been the theme of this session. It's been a little wonky. I think I want to do that's good. The link should just be our blue color and no underline. So in the show thread, anchors will be blue 2, text decoration none. Okay. That should be the blue, and it should be hoverlink. I think maybe hoverlinks should just be var blue 2. Is that correct? Can we do that? Looks good. These obviously need to each have their own coloring. So the first, yeah, because they're actually not the same. Min width 2M. I don't know if that actually will fix anything. It's not perfect, but it'll work. And so these all need to have their hover things on there. And I think actually they should be, whoops, this is not what I want. A little bit smaller. So in our footer, let's just make our font size 1.6. Or maybe they already are 1.6. How does Twitter do it? The color definitely changes, which is something we missed on here. Okay, so anchor and colon hover. How did we structure these anchors? No. We have a span inside the anchor. Colon hover span. Yeah, it's a little tricky because we need these to be different colors. So this one is going to be blue. Okay, so we have, so it's retweet, like, share. Blue. Green. just do it like that. The only thing that's common between them is the text decoration. So let's do blue color. Actually, no, our color will inherit. Because we do want it to be gray when it's not. Yeah, so it's just for the hovers. Color, blue 2, and then our span, we have a background color of blue 1. Does that seem right? A.blue hover. Yeah, okay. So the span has a padding of 0.75 RAM. I think we'll need to do that either way to give them a bit of space. And a border radius of 50%. Green, red, red 1, and then this is green 2 and green 1. And then we just need to take this. No, because I got those numbers in there. Let's just equals blue. Nope. It's gonna go blue, red, green. I do want the font size to be a bit smaller, so in here I'm gonna say my font size is 1.4, but our span's font size will be 1.6. Even a bit smaller. Let's go. No, 12. That looks good. So here's live Twitter. Here was our first pass building our own version of it. And then now we're doing the classless CSS approach. So we finished this side here, we finished the center, pretty much, it's ready. And then now we can move over to this side here next week. But what we've taken is we've taken the original Twitter, we built it out using just HTML and CSS standard, and then now we're rebuilding using a classless CSS approach. So we still obviously do have some classes, and I'm learning more as we use this approach. It's a modern framework of the concept of, rather than using classes to define things, use the elements themselves, and so it makes you have to structure things better. So I've got a section named tweets, and inside there's articles, and that way I know that each tweet inside of that section or each article inside of that section is one tweet. and I can style it accordingly instead of having to give this a div with a class of tweet. One of the things that I'm learning, though, as doing this approach is that you need to do these sort of descendant selectors. So the first div within an article, we want it to display flex, and we want it to have a padding. And then the first child div within that div, we want to have a margin top. So this approach works, but this only works if we never change this markup. So that's one of the things that I'm noticing that with this approach, I don't think it's really effective to do it with these nesting things in here. So in these particular cases, I think you would want to use classes. So I think that's something that I'll do after finishing up applying it. It's a learning exercise to try to understand how to do this CSS classless approach, which is a pretty modern way of doing things. So everybody's kind of learning this right now, but that's one of the things that I would say is that I'm going to go back, I'm going to use my classless CSS approach for the top level things, but then within there I'll probably add some classes, just because these descendant selectors starts to get a little bit wonky, which is wonky has been the theme of today. Because now any first divs inside of an article, so if I have another div, so that's where it happened here, in this article I had another div with a div in here, so then that first div inside of this, because it's inside of an article, this also applies. I don't know if that was clear the way that I expressed that, but essentially this starts to get applied to other things that you put inside of there, and that's not what we want. We just wanted the first one. So then you end up having to undo styling further down the tree, which isn't effective. So that's why in this particular case I put this show thread in here, but we still had some of those effective things in there. So I think one of the biggest thing, like any constraint that you're putting, if you're doing constraints on art or you're doing constraints on software like this, the constraint itself teaches you a lot. So I'm really learning a lot about using these proper elements, the header and the footer, and I would actually do this as a main probably, because this is the main element in here inside of this article. But then we have to consider, okay, if we're styling a main, if we put a main in here and we style mains at the root level, we have to make sure that that's not applying all the way down the tree. So it really makes you think about the cascade. It really makes you understand the cascade and work through all these problems. So it's a great exercise to try to do this. I'm enjoying it. And I've seen some pitfalls in it, which is good. That's what it's for. Yeah, so we've got this center column pretty worked out. The next time we'll go through the right side, and then we'll probably clean up some of those pitfalls and review that process. So for anybody who's watching, if you want to get the code, it's all going to be pushed up to this repo, and feel free to give it a pull and play around with it yourself. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or anywhere that the links down below point to. That's it for today. I'm going to call it a few minutes early here. But thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time.